What is the purpose of the United Nations?
Is that a fair question? What is the purpose of the UN? What is it there for? What is it supposed to do? This is the UN Charter, Chapter 1, Purposes and Principles, Article 1. The purposes of the United Nations are to maintain international peace and security. That's literally the first line in Purposes and Principles. But let's go a bit further back to the preamble. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Clearly, the UN has been doing a stellar job. Right now, we just had the 80th session of the UN General Assembly taking place. So, for 80 years, the organization has been saving us from the scourge of war. Taking a look at this map, it seems like the UN missed a spot. And another. This one too. And this here. Okay, so maintaining international peace and security isn't easy. The UN is struggling. And it has been struggling for years. Decades. Actually, pretty much since the day it was formed. The thing is, that is by design. If you've heard of the United Nations, then you know about the Security Council. It's one of the 6 principal organs of the UN. The other organs are the UN General Assembly, the International Court of Justice, and some administrative and economic bodies. We won't get into those in this video. Our focus is the bodies that can actually help maintain international peace and security. The most important of these is the UN Security Council. Technically, the Council has 15 members, but in reality, just 5 of them matter. The 5 permanent members: the US, Britain, France, Russia, and China. These are the big 5. Everyone else gets shuffled around, but these 5 are permanent members. The Security Council is the only UN body that can pass binding resolutions. If they decide something, other UN members have to comply. So, if the scourge of war is spreading, the Security Council can pass resolutions telling the warring countries to stop. The Security Council can order UN peacekeeping forces to go into the war zone and uphold a ceasefire. And if a warring party doesn't agree to stand down, the Security Council can place sanctions on it. And every other UN member has to enforce those sanctions. It sounds great in theory. The UN Security Council sounds like a global watchdog, sniffing out and stopping the scourge of war. But there's a catch. Remember those 5 permanent members? Well, they don't just have the privilege of perpetual membership. They also have a special power, the veto. Normally, 9 out of the 15 Security Council members have to agree to pass a resolution. 60% is the pass mark. However, there's a catch. None of the 5 permanent members can vote against the resolution. If they do, the resolution fails. Let's take a practical example. The war in Gaza. Over 65,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. Hundreds of thousands displaced. Children are starving to death. It's the definition of scourge of war and genocide. So, the Security Council should step in and stop it, right? They tried that on September 18th. It was the UNSC's 10,000th meeting. A milestone. They had a draft resolution ready. It reaffirmed the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and demanded an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. A vote was taken. 14 UNSC members voted in favor, 1 against. It was 14-1, but the draft resolution was not adopted owing to the veto of a permanent member of the Council. The US basically said Israel should not be stopped from killing Palestinians because apparently the resolution failed to condemn Hamas or recognize Israel's right to defend itself. Yeah, apparently Washington didn't like the wording of the resolution. So, more Palestinian children have to starve or get blown up until the US is satisfied with the resolution's structure. it's a joke. The veto power essentially gives the 5 permanent members the ability to propagate or prolong any war they want. They can veto resolutions, peacekeeping missions, sanctions, everything. So the UNSC is essentially useless whenever a permanent member has any stakes, or if their allies or proxies are involved. In the previous example, the US basically didn't want anyone interfering with Israel. It doesn't matter that Benjamin Netanyahu is committing genocide in Gaza. The US still has Israel's back. And it's the same situation with Russia. In September 2022, the UNSC put forward this draft condemning Russia's war on Ukraine. Russia obviously vetoed it. The veto has always been used by the Big Five to stop other nations from interfering with their interests. 1956 Suez Crisis. France and the UK used the veto as they invaded Egypt. Same year, the Soviet Union invaded Hungary to defeat an anti-communist revolution there. The Soviets used their veto to stop any interference. The Korean War, Falklands War, the US invasion of Grenada in 1983. The Big Five members have used their vetoes liberally, either to support their wars or wars conducted by their friends. Thus, the UN Security Council is effectively useless. But what about the other two bodies, the UN General Assembly and the International Court of Justice? Well, those institutions are even more useless when it comes to stopping wars. The UN General Assembly represents every member country, but they can only pass non-binding resolutions. Non-binding means unenforceable. So the General Assembly is a talk shop, a place for debate and hand-wringing, not results. And the ICJ? In theory, it has more power. It can pass judgments. It can deem countries or leaders guilty of genocide. But the ICJ doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. It doesn't have its own army or police force. So even if they judge someone guilty of crimes against humanity, the court can't do anything about it. The ICJ depends on UN member states to enforce its verdicts. Those members that are party to the Rome Statute. There are 125 of them. Theoretically, the nations who are party to this treaty are obligated to enforce the ICJ's rulings. For example, if the court holds Benjamin Netanyahu guilty of committing genocide in Gaza, 125 UN member nations would be expected to arrest him and haul him before the court if he ever entered their sovereign territory. But two problems with this. First, guess who isn't party to the Rome Statute? The US, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and a bunch of others. So, Netanyahu could go merrily to any of these nations without risking arrest. But the bigger issue is that even if he flies to a Rome Statute party nation like the UK or France or Australia, there's no guarantee that they will actually obey any ICJ ruling. They could just ignore the ICJ and the court wouldn't be able to do anything about it because it doesn't have any enforcement mechanism. That's the crux of the issue with the ICJ and the UN in general. The institution has no real means of achieving its purpose. It is toothless by design. The lone UN body with any real power, the Security Council, is dominated by the worst offenders to peace and stability in the world, the Big Five permanent members. They have veto powers and they have nuclear weapons, allowing them to wage war with impunity. So it was fair for Trump to ask what the UN's purpose is, but it wasn't fair for him to omit the whole story. His country and 4 others are the reason that the UN keeps failing to fulfill its purpose. So long as the veto power exists, the UN will keep failing at maintaining international peace and security, and the rest of us will always be plagued by the scourge of war.